When people hear about military movement, they often imagine something loud, visible, and dramatic. Convoys rolling in, press briefings, headlines everywhere. But in reality, some of the most important moves happen quietly, almost unnoticed. That's exactly what makes this kind of situation different. It's not about what's being announced, it's about what's happening without being announced. When the United States begins shifting military assets without drawing attention, it usually signals a deeper level of planning. This isn't random activity or routine rotation. These decisions are based on layers of intelligence, satellite imagery, intercepted communications, threat assessments, all pointing toward a situation that requires readiness but not publicity. The goal isn't to inform the public in real time, but to stay one step ahead of any possible escalation. You'll often see naval groups adjusting their positions, aircraft quietly relocating to forward bases, and support systems being activated behind the scenes. These movements are calculated to maintain flexibility. In other words, the U.S. wants to be in a position where it can respond immediately, whether that response is defensive, strategic, or something more direct. And that kind of readiness doesn't happen overnight. It's built step by step, quietly. There's also a strategic advantage to staying silent. When movements aren't publicly highlighted, it creates uncertainty for everyone watching, especially potential adversaries. They can see that something is changing, but they don't fully understand the scale or the intention. That uncertainty becomes pressure. It forces other countries to think twice, to reassess their own positions, and sometimes to hold back from making aggressive moves. Another key part of this is timing. Quiet military movement usually happens when the situation is already sensitive, even if it doesn't look that way on the surface. It's a signal that decision-makers are paying close attention and preparing for multiple outcomes at once. Not just one plan, but several, depending on how things unfold. That includes rapid response options, evacuation scenarios, and coordination with allies. And what makes this even more important is that these actions often happen before the public fully understands what's at stake. By the time it becomes headline news, a lot of the groundwork has already been laid, which means the real story isn't just what you're seeing now, it's what's already been set in motion behind the scenes. When tensions rise in the Middle East, it's rarely because of a single event. It's usually the result of, when you hear the term strategic positioning, it might sound technical, but in reality, it's one of the most critical phases in any potential conflict scenario. This is the stage where everything is being set up, not for immediate action, but for the ability to act at any moment. It's controlled, deliberate, and highly calculated. For the United States, strategic positioning means placing military assets in locations where they can respond quickly, without needing additional time to mobilize. That includes moving naval carrier groups into key waters, positioning fighter jets at forward operating bases, and ensuring that support systems, logistics, intelligence, and communication networks are fully active and synchronized. None of this is accidental. Every placement has a purpose, and every movement is part of a larger operational design. What makes this phase so important is flexibility. Instead of committing to one course of action, positioning allows multiple options to stay open at the same time. If the situation cools down, forces can remain as a deterrent. If tensions rise, those same forces can transition into active roles almost instantly. That ability to shift from passive to active posture is what gives strategic positioning its power. There's also a strong psychological dimension to it. When other countries observe these movements, they understand that readiness is no longer theoretical. It's real and immediate. That creates pressure without a single shot being fired. It sends a message that any escalation will be met with a prepared response. But at the same time, it raises the stakes, because now both sides are operating in a heightened state of awareness. Another layer to this is coordination. Strategic positioning isn't done in isolation. It often involves close communication with allies, shared intelligence, and aligned readiness plans. That means it's not just about one country preparing, it's about a network of partners adjusting together, making the overall response capability stronger and more complex. And then there's the issue of timing. Once forces are in position, the window for decision-making becomes much shorter. Leaders no longer need days or weeks to prepare. They can act within hours, sometimes even minutes. That speed can be an advantage, but it also increases the risk of rapid escalation if something goes wrong or is misinterpreted. When a situation reaches the point where mixed signals start dominating the narrative, it usually means there's a gap between what's being said publicly and what's actually happening behind the scenes. And that gap creates confusion, not just for the public, but for analysts, allies, and even the countries directly involved. Right now, you can see that contrast clearly. On one side, the United States may signal that diplomatic channels are still open, talking about negotiations, de-escalation, or backdoor communication. On the other side, you have visible military adjustments and strategic positioning happening at the same time. Those two messages don't always align, and that's where uncertainty begins to grow. From the perspective of Iran, the response can be just as complex. Public statements may strongly deny any ongoing talks or downplay external pressure, while internally there could still be indirect communication happening through intermediaries. This kind of dual messaging isn't unusual in geopolitics. It allows a country to maintain a firm public stance while keeping options open behind closed doors. The problem is, when both sides are sending layered or even contradictory signals, it becomes harder to read the situation accurately. Is this a moment of genuine diplomacy, or just a pause before further escalation? Are statements meant to calm tensions or to buy time? Without clear communication, every message becomes open to interpretation. This is where miscalculation becomes a real risk. One side might interpret a defensive move as preparation for an attack. A diplomatic signal might be seen as weakness. And once those interpretations start driving decisions, actions can escalate quickly, even if neither side originally intended to push things that far. Media coverage and information flow add another layer to this confusion. Reports come out from different sources, sometimes contradicting each other. Officials may confirm one detail and deny another. Leaks, speculation, and strategic messaging all mix together, creating a narrative that's constantly shifting. For an audience watching from the outside, especially in the US, it can feel like the story keeps changing by the hour. And in environments like this, clarity becomes rare. Decision-makers have to operate with incomplete information, weighing multiple possibilities at once. Every move is calculated, but never fully certain. That uncertainty is what makes this phase so sensitive, because even a small misunderstanding can carry consequences far beyond what was originally intended. When tensions in the Middle East begin to rise, the impact doesn't stay confined to the region. It quickly spreads into the global system, especially the economy. One of the most sensitive pressure points in this situation is the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow passage that handles a significant portion of the world's oil supply. Even the possibility of disruption in this area is enough to shake global markets. For countries like the United States and its allies, stability in energy flow is critical. When tensions involving Iran increase, traders and investors immediately start reacting. Oil prices can spike within hours, not necessarily because supply has already been affected, but because of the fear that it might be. That fear alone drives decisions in financial markets, pushing volatility higher. Shipping routes also become a major concern. Tankers moving through key waterways face higher risks, which leads to increased insurance costs and stricter security measures. Some shipping companies may even choose to reroute entirely, taking longer and more expensive paths to avoid potential danger zones. That added cost doesn't just stay within the shipping industry, it eventually reaches consumers through higher prices on goods and fuel. The aviation sector feels the pressure too. Airlines constantly monitor conflict zones, and when tensions rise, they adjust flight paths to avoid risky airspace. That means longer routes, increased fuel consumption, and scheduling disruptions. For passengers, it might show up as delays or slightly higher ticket prices, but behind the scenes, it's a complex logistical challenge that airlines have to manage in real time. Global supply chains are another layer affected by this instability. Modern trade depends on predictable, efficient movement of goods. When key regions become uncertain, delays and disruptions start to appear. Manufacturers may face shortages, retailers may see rising costs, and entire industries can feel the ripple effects of a situation happening thousands of miles away. There's also a broader psychological impact on markets and governments. When uncertainty becomes the dominant factor, decision-making shifts. Investors become cautious, businesses delay expansion, and governments may adjust economic policies to prepare for potential shocks. Even without a direct conflict, the environment of tension alone is enough to slow momentum and create a more defensive global outlook. A buildup, small incidents stacking on top of each other until the entire situation starts to feel unstable. Right now, that's exactly what's happening between Iran and Israel. This isn't new, but the intensity has been increasing in a way that's getting harder to ignore. You have to understand, most of these confrontations don't happen in a straightforward, declared way. They're often indirect, through targeted strikes, cyber activity, proxy groups, or strategic warnings. One side makes a move, the other responds, and then that response triggers another reaction. It becomes a cycle, and with every cycle, the risk level climbs a little higher. What makes this moment more serious is how frequent and layered these incidents have become. It's no longer isolated or occasional. There's a pattern forming, a rhythm of action and response that suggests both sides are testing limits, trying to push without crossing a line that would trigger full-scale conflict. But that line is getting thinner. There's also the issue of perception. Each side believes it's acting defensively or out of necessity, but the other side sees it as aggression. That difference in interpretation is where things get dangerous. Because once intentions are misunderstood, even a controlled move can be seen as escalation. And when that happens, responses tend to be faster and more forceful. On top of that, this isn't just about two countries. The region is filled with alliances, rivalries, and overlapping interests. Other players are always watching, sometimes supporting, sometimes influencing from the background. That turns a bilateral tension into a multi-layered situation, where one incident can have ripple effects across multiple countries. And then there's the pace of information. Reports come out, then get denied, then replaced by new claims. It creates a constant state of uncertainty where it's hard to tell what's confirmed and what's strategic messaging. For audiences, especially in the US, it can feel distant. But for policymakers and analysts, this kind of environment signals a shift from routine tension to something far more unstable and reactive. When a situation reaches the level of uncertainty we're seeing right now, it enters what analysts often describe as a danger zone, not because conflict has already begun, but because the conditions are in place where almost anything can trigger a rapid shift. This is the phase where clarity disappears and decisions start being made under pressure with incomplete information. For the United States and Iran, uncertainty doesn't just mean not knowing what the other side will do. It means having to prepare for multiple possibilities at once. Military planners, intelligence agencies, and leadership teams are all working with scenarios rather than certainties. That means every move is calculated, but also carries a level of risk because it's based on interpretation, not absolute facts. One of the biggest challenges in this phase is timing. When forces are already positioned and on alert, decisions can be executed very quickly. There's no long delay between planning and action. If a signal is misread or an event is misunderstood, the response can come almost immediately. And once that response is in motion, it can be difficult to slow things down. Another factor is how quickly situations can escalate from something small. In high-tension environments, even minor incidents, a warning, a movement, a miscommunication, can be seen as intentional escalation. That perception alone can trigger a reaction, and then that reaction creates a chain effect. What might have started as a limited or controlled situation can expand rapidly without either side initially intending for it to go that far. Communication plays a critical role here, but it's often at its weakest point during uncertain phases. Messages can be delayed, misinterpreted, or influenced by political pressure. Public statements might not fully reflect internal decisions, and behind-the-scenes communication may not be strong enough to prevent misunderstandings. That gap increases the chances of unintended consequences. At the same time, there's constant pressure to act strong and decisive. No country wants to appear unprepared or hesitant, especially in front of both allies and adversaries. That pressure can influence decision-making, sometimes pushing actions to happen faster than they otherwise would. It's not just about strategy. It's also about perception, credibility, and maintaining a position of strength on the global stage. And what makes this phase particularly sensitive is that once events start moving, they tend to move fast. The window to pause, reassess, or de-escalate becomes smaller. Leaders have less time to weigh options and more pressure to respond in real time. That combination, speed, uncertainty, and pressure, is what makes this stage so unpredictable and difficult to control.